Hello, everybody, and welcome to another VMware Cloud Office Hours. This is our informal office hours session, so no formal webinar here today. This is kind of bi-weekly. Last week we did network intelligence, or network insight, which was actually a fantastic session that I thoroughly enjoyed. Next week at this time, by the way, I apologize for the time change. We're working out some kinks on our back end for scheduling and, some more promotion stuff like that. So it's definitely something we're looking at. Again, this week was kind of a little bit of a one-off, and I got to apologize. But next week at this time at 6 p.m. Pacific, we're going to be going over our site recovery service and as a service, and which should really be a good session. We have GS also, who I've known for quite a long time, who's worked with the SRM product for, I believe, for forever. So it'd be exciting for me. I always enjoy talking to GS, and he's going to be on next week, and we're going to run with that. So this week, I thought I would kind of cover, and I've covered this a little bit in the past, maybe a couple weeks ago, and we didn't spend a lot of time on it. And this is something that we are really working hard towards in the customer success group, as we are really trying to come up with design best practices and architecture best practices and things like that, because I hate the term best practices. I think it's got kind of a connotation to it now, so we've tossed around some different verbiage and vocabulary around architectural guidance or something like that. But the point really, to me, remains the same. And that's essentially that, we've, and the customer success team are in the, I guess you could view it as envious position that we see a lot of customers. We see almost all of our customers, the big customers, and we've seen what works, what doesn't. And we really like to communicate the lessons we have learned from our experience out to you guys, to your customers, and to our customers, and to our partners, to get them as successful the first time coming on board. And that's something that is, paramount to us as a company and as a group, to really get that best usage of the product out there, and again, make everybody as humanly successful as possible. Now, what I'll go over here today is some of and this is something that I put together, and I've worked with our group on it, and we do present this kind of material at VMugs, and I did a VLZ this morning, a VMware Learning Zone, if somebody wants to check out this content in its entirety. This is part of a much bigger deck that's, like I said, used to kind of present these things from our customer success perspective. But I really wanted to spend some time and delve into the our lessons learned, and spend some time here. We might not make the whole hour or such, but we're going to work on it, and we'll see where we get to. So, by far, the number one thing that I can recommend to all customers, and I think this is echoed by everybody within our organization, is plan your networks. This is probably by far the number one aspect that could affect the topology and the architecture of what you're trying to do in VMware Cloud. And I'm going to expand this out a little bit to kind of let you know what I'm talking about. So, first, one of the first questions, or I guess it's not technically the first question, but the fifth question we ask you when creating an SDDC is for a management CIDR range. And we have varying sizes, and we have some articles done by members of our team and some documentation that really gives a lot of guidance around this. That's fantastic, that I highly recommend people read if you go to the blog at cloud.vmware.com. There's some from our team in there that goes over this, and from others. But this is really the best the best advice we can give here is go as big as possible. And I know that a lot of environments there's network constraints and other stuff that could contribute to this being a little bit difficult. But the bigger you make this, we use that management CIDR range for all of the hosts in the SDDC, ENI connections, your vCenter, NSX manager, NSX controllers, edges, all of that stuff comes out of this management cider range. And if you make it too small, this is something that can't be changed afterwards. So what you'd have to do is create another SDDC and migrate to it, or have two different SDDCs. And this can really kind of complex things up for you. So when, and like I said, this is asked on day one. So the second you spin up an SDDC, this you need to know, and you need to know it for sure, and size out your clusters and your IP space so that you can actually get it, the proper size, so you don't have to undo a lot of work that you're already doing. And that's something that I can't highlight enough, is I'm never one to have people, or even myself, want to do rework. So along with that, the next big conversation that always happens is, do you stretch layer 2 or not? And that is a question that only you can answer. We can make as best recommendations as we can. Definitely migrations are easier if you stretch, well, from a technical standpoint, they're easier if you stretch your layer 2. You can live vMotion, you can use HCX to live migrate. But it requires a very good understanding of your applications and the latencies that they can tolerate. So if you decide to move a whole bunch of applications to VMware Cloud and stretch it, and your databases are still on-prem, or even depending on the technology you use to migrate, your gateway can still exist on-prem, even though all of your resources are in VMware Cloud. Until you kind of unstretch it, you'll have a lot of hairpinning, tromboning, whatever term you want to use for it, for that traffic. And depending on where you're located and what kind of connections you are, that could be sizable. And that's something that really people need to think about beyond just the what's kind of easiest to migrate. And again, this could have some pretty big impact for how you design your SDDCs and what things you leverage to bring them out and to really work with them going forward. So again, this is a question we really want people to think about. And again, from our perspective, we really can't help you answer that question. I mean, we can give guidance, but this is something that ultimately will be on you guys to decide whether or not this is a valid thing or not. And traditionally, what we've seen our customers do, we've seen a lot of them stretch. That has been, from my experience, a more common scenario. But when that choice is made, then a lot more changes and a lot more decisions need to be made. And it's something I'll bring up later about how you migrate things. So, after getting your management cider straightened out, stretch or not to stretch. Now, the next part is how are you going to connect to this SDDC, right? Do you already have a whole bunch of existing AWS workloads? Are you going to have multiple SDDCs? Are you going to use a transit VPC, which is an AWS construct? Are you going to use, the transit gateway? Are you going to connect with, direct connector? Are you going to just VPN? Is this just going to be entirely held within the cloud? Right? This is a very, very big overarching question that has a lot of impact. And the better you can plan this out before you go in, it'll really assist in how you then design your SDDC layout and where you put your resources. So again, I can't emphasize how important the planning of one's network topologies is going to be, right? And I think, it kind of goes without saying, but a lot of people don't really understand all of the little caveats we need in there. Now, the nice thing is with layer 2 stretching, or even direct connects or VPN connectivity, those kinds of things can be changed later on. If you end up getting to, a point where, you were using VPN, but now there's enough resources in there, you want to use a direct connect, that can be done. But the management cider for sure needs to be decided on day one. Now, moving along, sorry here, and I like my Albert Einstein here, by the way. So moving along with that, we're going to get into the actual planning of the SDDC. And I apologize for the pause here, but I get bothered for work never ends. So we recommend architecting for a maximum cluster size of 16. And I kind of put 16 as the new 32, or I said 16 is the new 64 or whatever. And we have an absolute maximum size of 30. and that's to allow for resources to the cluster when we need to do maintenance activities. But we really, really, really want people to design as much as possible to the 16. And it is a soft limit within VMware Cloud right now as well. The product itself will not let you go over 16 in a cluster right now without opening a support ticket. And that's really to ensure that, we're architecting this well and doing the design well. Now, you can have 10 clusters in an SDDC. So 16 hosts in a cluster, 10 hosts. You can still have 160 hosts, which is, no small amount still. We have some customers that will probably go exceed that and then have exceeded that. But, we really want people to look at 16 as that cap size and try to design around that. Now, what kind of caveats can you think about? And I wish I kind of put these bullet points in a different order, but what we really want some people to do is to keep your layer 2 boundaries within the SDDC, right? So all those 10 clusters of 16 hosts, keep the same layer 2 segment within there. It gets pretty complicated if you need to stretch L2 between multiple SDDCs. And that's something I should probably mention before is once you hit that cluster cap, or even before you hit that cluster cap for whatever matter, you can create another SDDC, right? There's nothing to stop you from doing that. So you can have 10 SDDCs with 16 hosts in it or 10 clusters. Again, this all depends on your layout, and a lot of this will depend on, what regions you want to have things in, where your connectivity is coming from. That will, help to plan out where these SDDCs are placed. But when you come up with that, try to keep that L2 within the same, where it gets really complicated really fast. You won't go into a huge amount of detail around that besides just, please keep it within there. Now, the other bullet point to mention right here now, and this is becoming less of a problem as we move forward. So for everybody that hasn't heard the news, about a month ago, give or take, we made NSXT, or I think we call it advanced networking, the default within VMware Cloud. So when you kick out an SDDC now as a new customer, or even an existing customer to a degree, it will become out a NSXT-based network. But you can't mix V and T. So if you were an existing customer and you currently have V, within the same SDDC, you cannot kick out a T. If that kind of makes sense. Hopefully I know I'm throwing T's and V's around a lot. You can create another SDDC. We are in the process right now of migrating our customers from V to T, and that's taking a number of different forms, and we're still hammering out a lot of the scheduling and process around that. But at the moment, that's something to kind of consider when you're looking at your SDDC layout. Again, like I said, this is going to become a little bit of a smaller problem as things go forward and everything becomes advanced networking / NSXT. Now, multi-AZ, and I guess I should probably cover this a little bit for those that don't know what multi-AZ is. So multi-AZ is essentially we take a cluster and we stretch it across 2 different availability zones in the same region in AWS. What this does is protect you against failures of an availability zone within AWS, which does happen occasionally. The one just happened not that long ago, and this will protect you from that. There is a little bit of a premium to the price, and obviously there's a duplication of storage to make sure the resources are on both sides. So there's a lot of caveats that kind of go around that. But the way I bring it up here in the terms of planning your SDDC is you can't have a multi-AZ cluster and a regular cluster within the same SDDC right now. Again, that's something we're looking at. This is something that's going to be probably more long term. So it's very paramount that if you're going to utilize both regular and multi-AZ, and again, keeping in mind these cluster sizes and keeping L2 in the same SDDC, you can kind of see how quickly these things can get a little bit more complex than they first initially seem to be. And doing this planning up front will really help you. Again, avoiding issues of having a one multi-AZ and with some resources in it, and then a regular SEC cluster with some other resources in the same L2, and it'll just get complicated. So really think those through first, decide which one resources need to be in there, and we can, again, we can help with guidance here, but this is really questions that as a customer you need to, decide on if you want to pay a little bit of a premium for that higher level of availability, or, if our 3 nines is if our quote unquote regular SDDC is fine for you. So that's all stuff that you got to think about. And then when you think about that and you make that decision, and especially if you're mixing, well, then you got to really start doing some thought around which applications go where, and can we keep the same L2 within those SDDC boundaries to avoid some other issues. So big thoughts, lots of conversations that had to be had there. Or it might be easy and you might say, oh, I'm just going to go multi-AZ across the board. Not a problem. Or you can say, oh, I'm just going to go regular across the board. Again, eases things up. Now, moving along, planning your migrations. So, I went a little bit too far there. So, we have every piece of technology in the world that can make this easy for you. That's only part of the problem, right? So the first technical thing you need to think about is, bandwidth and time considerations, how long it's going to take to replicate X amount of data, what the data change is, all those kinds of things definitely need to be considered from a technical level. But the bigger question is the second question that we have here, and that's what to move and when, right? It's very easy for us to use HCX and have a big bulk of stuff and migrate it all up to the cloud and away you go. Again, that's never the problem for us is to actually move the stuff for you. But now, like I talked about a little bit earlier about the stretching or not to stretch, it's like, okay, well, what should I move? Should I move a layer 2 segment at once? If I move all of my applications and leave all of my databases on-prem, how is that going to work? All these kinds of little considerations. Generally, what we like to see to do is there's two things that I generally try to recommend. They're not as easy as I maybe make them sound, but there's the first is what we call what I call anyway, maybe a trademark it, but the Big Bang weekend, right? So it's and this is something that's great for use of HCX and being able to do scheduled migrations. You can sync everything over to the cloud. And once it's there, you take a little bit of a painful few hours on a weekend to just migrate everything at once, right? Now, again, there's going to be a little bit of outages as, your network switch over and you switch load balancers over to the cloud and all these types of things and ensuring your applications are up and running. But it does alleviate a lot of the problems, and then you can kind of then seal off that L2 span to your on-premises and just run it in the cloud and then just work through any of the issues that pop up. And there probably is not a lot of issues when you kind of do it in that manner, but that's really painful to do for a lot of customers, and I understand that. Once being a customer myself, it's very hard to negotiate those kinds of changes with change boards and stuff because it's viewed in some degree as a high risk. I choose not to think of it as that high of risk. I think that there's many options to fail back or whatever, or just to deal with the problem when it's moved into the cloud. And we've had a few customers do it this way, and it's been very successful. Now, the other one I'd like to recommend is to move layer 2 segments at the same time. So as opposed to having half of an application or half of a VLAN in your on-premises and the other half in the cloud, which obviously, you can think about how the network, the low latencies behind that would be there. And then that also prevents us from, flipping over the gateway to one side or the other to reduce those latencies. So where you can kind of do it on a network segment is the best. But as we all know, and again, I've been the customer and I've been on the other end of this, is, somebody puts an application into a wrong VLAN, re-IPing things is hard. So it can get quite difficult. And, then the third thing is, and this kind of goes along with the Big Bang, is to migrate applications at a time. And this one gets a lot more complicated to some degrees because a lot of applications are in different VLANs, unless, when you're in a utopian world of, you did a lot of good network planning on your on-premises side and had everything nicely logically separated out and it made it easy for you to do. But that is a very effective way of moving things, and again, to keep those latencies down between the pieces of your traditional 3-tier applications or just application and databases or just applications that talk to each other frequently. That's the best way to do it. So the question so there is a large amount of planning that goes to that. Like I said, from a technical standpoint, for my piece of the job, it's all very easy. Say, well, hey, you could either cold migrate, you can live vMotion if you're direct connect in HLM, or you can use HCX to do live migrations or bulk migrations or scheduled migrations or whatever. That's the easy part. Now, where I would really recommend people to do is to reach out to partners or to VMware. A lot of companies out there that we partner with in our own professional services organization have a very long history of doing migrations. And this is migrations between different data centers, migrations within the same data center, migrations to public cloud, all of those kinds of things. So leverage that help that's out there, because this is really the biggest crux of moving to the cloud. Doing the planning out and providing that really good infrastructure for it to move to is a very important first part. But if this part fails, and this is really where the rubber meets the road and where we see the most issues start to arise, is actually then moving the workloads. And, maybe you have a perfect world again where you're just going to start new in the cloud. And that's fantastic if you can do that. But again, not a lot of customers could do that. But, it's really use the tools out there that are available to you. We do have quite a few tools like we covered earlier last week, where Network Insight, where you can actually look at what your applications are talking to, because as we all know out there, you ask, your average application guy or even your server guy and say, okay, what does this application talk to? And they're going to say, well, it talks to this, and then there's obviously something else it talks to that you don't realize it until you migrated it, and then before you know it, it's broken and it's a big problem. Tools like Network Insight will help you to identify that on the way in. You can see what servers are talking to each other to really put together a very effective plan for how you move these workloads. And again, lots of partners out there. Our own professional services can help with this, and this is definitely a service for doing that, because we want that migration to go as seamless to the cloud. And we can, when this is properly planned out with the technology we have, we can make this pretty much seamless to your end users. They won't even notice that the stuff has moved from your on-premise or from another cloud to VMware Cloud. And that's really what we want to see, is to minimize all of those impacts. And we've been highly successful at it. Now, where we've seen it not be so successful is in places that didn't necessarily, put as much thought into this as maybe was warranted. So the last point I cover, so we might make this a shorter week this week, and unless we have a lot of questions, and again, everybody feel free to ask questions in Twitch chat or to me on Twitter at vcloudmatt. I'm kind of monitoring both. But this is, to me, the perhaps most important part. And I know that I probably said that a few times, but I mean it this time. This time for reals. We back up the management component. So there is a little bit of confusion here, and I actually wrote a blog article on my blog site, vcloudmatt.com, throwing some advertising in here. We back up the management components. So when we say we back up the stuff in VMware Cloud, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the NSX Manager, we're talking about vCenter, all those kinds of things. So if some catastrophic failure happens at that level, what we will do is spin up a new SDDC and restore all those workloads back, all of the management workloads back into it, and you'll have your SDDC back up and running in a very short order. But that doesn't help your compute workloads, right? And people often, and this is always a very big rant of mine, and thing that I really try to focus on customers is we quite often confuse availability with recoverability. So even when we're talking about these multi-AZ clusters or regular clusters, as multi-AZ is 4 nines, regular 3 nines. This is availability. So that's handling stuff like host failures, switch going down, and data center, those kinds of things. Even multi-AZ doesn't protect you from things like data corruption. Somebody deletes a VM. Silly things like that anytime we have humans involved in a system, these things will invariably happen. Now, we don't, like I said, don't back that up for you. So if that happens, even in a multi-AZ cluster, and you have a bunch of data corruption in your databases, you're going to need to restore these, right? And if you're not backing it up, well, there's nothing to restore to. A lot of people make the default assumption that because workloads are in the cloud, that they're redundant, and they can be made to be. And I don't mean to say that that there's not ways that this is a completely false statement, but it's not inherent to the product, and this is even within Amazon or any other cloud, that you get away from the onus of doing your own backups. Now, we have a large amount of customers or partners out there, and this is available on the VMware website for our compatibility matrix about backup vendors we support. Now, there's a lot of really cool solutions out there for it. A lot leverage the S3 buckets that you can peer to your SDDC for lower cost storage of those backup components. And even then, you can use S3 technologies to replicate those backups to other places. Or you could just even use it within, there's the virtual data domains. There's all kinds of technology out there, but leverage it. Please, leverage it. If you don't, things can go potentially pretty bad for you when you have to walk in. Trust me, I've been on the other end of those where you have to go in front of a whole bunch of executives and say, I'm sorry, that data is no longer here. And those are no fun to do. And so it's really a very strong impetus that again, we backup management. That part we got for you. But leverage those partner tools out there, or even if you have your own in-house built tools as you can back up to S3, definitely leverage that. Now, one of the cool use cases that we've actually been able to have around this is you can actually back up your on-prem, the cloud, and then restore to a VMware SDDC if the need arises. So you could use these on-prem backup solutions to back up all of these things to an S3 bucket in the cloud. And in the event of a DR, you can actually spin up a VMware SDDC, peer it to that AWS VPC that has the S3 bucket in it, bring all those workloads out and have them up and running. Again, this will be a little bit longer because it takes a couple hours to spin up an SDDC. But again, this is a lot quicker than ordering hardware or scraping what servers people have laying around to throw into a data center, hopefully somewhere, and getting it up and running. So there's definitely a lot of options for how you can recover these workloads. We have, like I said, next week at this time, we're going to talk about our option of using site recovery. So you could either back up your on-prem to VMC with Site Recovery Manager. You can do fan in now, so you can have multiple SDDCs that could be backed up to one VMware SDDC. Nice thing about that is, especially when you start adding our R5 hosts with bigger capacities behind it, you can have a very small footprint. But in the event of an actual DR, you can scale that out extremely fast and get the resources you need. So you kind of pay the minimum when you don't need it and have the flexibility to get the resources when you do, as opposed to having to buy everything, putting in another data center. Then the conversations always end up, well, we don't want to just have a whole bunch of hardware sitting there doing nothing. So we put a bunch of dev workloads on there, which then complicates my recovery strategy and all this kind of, right? So what we really want people to do, and we were actually working more on methods to have a very small SDDC footprint that you pay for with large amounts of capacity behind it, that you can do all this backup to, all this site recovery back to, and then, again, in the event of a failure, because of the nature of our technology and how quickly we can spin up stuff, bam, you're up and running in the cloud. So again, I know I kind of went a little bit long on the backup and recovery, but that's what I think. We had a comment in the chat saying that or connect with Faction. So there is actually a slide in this deck. Like I said at the VLC this morning, that Faction is one of these partners that actually has what they call their CCVs, Cloud Control Volume, which is essentially an NFS share behind our VMware Cloud. So they're the only partner right now that has a separate storage solution available to them as a service. It runs in VMware Cloud, so it's still run by us. Our management parts are still managed by us, but there is a different storage backend which gives, like was mentioned in chat here, a more flexibility again towards that minimal footprint of SDDC with a large amount of storage behind it. I love the Faction guys. I've been working with them and had some emails. And like I said, there is actually a slide in this deck about it, and I did thank you for bringing that up. We have other partners coming on board as well that are looking at that. Ourselves, we're looking at adding more storage options to the back end, again, to increase that flexibility, because this is such a primary use case that a lot of people don't do because it's either too hard to manage another data center or it's cost prohibitive. So again, I know I harped on the backup stuff, but I can't emphasize enough how important this is, and how that thinking around, well, it's in the cloud, it's protected, needs to kind of be assuaged, and we need to actually do our jobs there. So, again, that was kind of a whole lot of information kind of thrown out there. Feel free to ask any questions if you want right now. We are continuing to work on developing, again, lack of better term, best practices. I don't know. Is architectural recommendations any better? I don't really know, but maybe it sounds better to me around this guidance. But as long as you kind of follow just these fairly few bullet points, it'll really save you a large amount of grief down the road. There is, this kind of thought, like I said, even around the backup, and it extends a lot. The other things is that I'll just huck stuff into the cloud and it'll work. That's not necessarily the case, right? So the more thought you put into it before, and again, my team's around to help with this. There's lots of resources, there's lots of partners around, again, to help you with these kinds of conversations. We're taking away the part of you having to worry about scaling your vCenters, or procuring hardware, or any of those kind of matters, which is really a big piece. And we update things for you, which I know is a very large consideration for when I was back at being an administrator. That patching time was something that we all just kind of were put off, and that's why we've seen some hosts out there. I've seen some that have been running for 600 plus days without being rebooted, which I guess is a testament to our product, but that's not what we want people to do. And because we're releasing stuff and features and functionality so quickly, we take that onus on. So it is really in your own best interest to put that little bit of effort in early on, and ask us. We can ask you these questions. We can work with you with these the answers for this. But as long as you do these kinds of things that I mentioned here, well, in the first place, you'll be very well set up to run in VMware Cloud. And I hope that is understandable by everybody. And I know that's there's a lot behind these few bullet points, but these are exactly what you need to have in your mind. And it's something that we quite often get asked: is do you have a run book, or do you have something that you can leverage to us that would help us be successful? And I would kind of refer people to this. And this is something that we're working on putting in a more formalized type of manner, but with the speed of which things change, it's really just these basics. It's the technology might change, but a lot of these questions will always remain the same. So, with that all said, is there any other questions out there, comments? Does this stuff make sense to everybody? I hope it does. I know some of the things aren't necessarily popular about limiting, cluster sizes to 16 kind of thing. But, again, this is to ensure the highest rate of success of your workloads within VMware Cloud. And that's really what I personally want to see everybody have, because when it doesn't work, usually I have to get involved in those. I'd much rather have these conversations on the front end than after something else has happened. So if there's no questions, I think we'll keep this a little bit short this week. I really do appreciate everybody that came out on short notice. We should be now back to the regular cadence of next week will be at 6 p.m. And then we're going to, after the week of that, it's going to be 8 a.m. and then 8 a.m. and then back to the cadence. We had a little bit of a hiccup just this week in the scheduling. So I really appreciate it coming out. I appreciate the feedback in chat and some interactivity. Again, you can always tweet at me at vcloudmatt. You can email us at cloudcs@vmware.com for any other ideas or any topics you want covered. Like I said, we have site recovery coming up next week. I'm working on hopefully getting Faction and some of our other partners to come up and present their solutions as well to show how the ecosystem is out there. But we're always open to ideas or anything anybody wants to see. And with that, again, like I said, thank you everybody, and I will see you next week.